Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. My name is Brian Androsian, and with me is Dylan Dodson. And today we're going to be answering your ministry questions.
And before we get to that, this episode is brought to you by Ministry Support. Ministry Support knows you want to be effective in ministry, but if you're like most pastors or many ministry leaders, you never feel like you have enough time, energy, or expertise to get everything done. And so Ministry Support comes alongside pastors as a guide to provide the expertise to do the things you don't know how to do and to give you back time you desperately need. So whether it's bookkeeping, SEO, payroll, websites, a lot of these administrative tasks, you can talk with a guide at missionsupport.com and go from feeling scattered to focused on your mission. It is possible to love being a pastor again. So again, missionsupport.com. They do a lot of great, administrative stuff, come alongside of you and at a reasonable price to help you out and help you focus on ministry. So missionsupport.com. Check them out.
That's right.
Okay, now today we did this, I guess a few months ago now. We went through some of our Facebook Practical Church Planting Facebook group.
Yep.
And although these questions aren't necessarily directed at us, they are directed at ministry people in general. And of course, sometimes it's hard to really give good answers in a little Facebook comment.
Yeah.
And so in this episode, we're gonna scroll through some of the most recent ones and just give our thoughts on them.
Yeah.
And so if you ask a recent one that's relevant to this conversation, we're going to answer it. And of course, you can always ask anybody questions on our Practical Church Planting Facebook group if you have not yet joined.
That's right. It's not just us answering questions, but whole community.
Yes, but in this episode, we're going to answer some of them that, we're just going to give our thoughts on it.
Yeah.
Some ones that are relevant. We'll skip over the ones that maybe aren't as helpful. So,
Right. Yeah.
The first one we have, the person writes, could we discuss best practices for hosting guest pastors and speakers, honorariums, hospitality, and what to avoid? Now, we do this. We don't have comprehensive answers, and also we're just like talking about these. We haven't thought.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll just share what we do when we have like guest preachers come and preach. We've landed on at this point we have a budget, and we give them $100 gift card to somewhere when they come and preach for us.
Yep.
And of course, it's probably their time's worth more than that. We're not a large church though, so it's not like we're not flying anyone out. We're not driving anybody out. Like they're close-ish. Close-ish. Got this backwards.
There you go.
Unless we have like a church planter that we're actually financially supporting, then that's different because we do that as well. But if we have somebody who, is just coming from the community, we'll often give them a $100 gift card to Amazon or something like that. And that's what we've landed on. People do different things. But that's what we do.
Yeah, obviously, like you said, it changes whether it's just a person coming in to preach or a church we're supporting. But just as the day we're recording this, the day before yesterday, we had someone come in to preach actually,
and we gave him nothing, because he's a really good friend of mine, and he's going to be planting a church, and we're going to be supporting that church.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was going to say it, but whatever.
But if it wasn't that sort of relationship,
exactly. Yeah.
That's what we typically do. So if we weren't going to support them when they plant, obviously that would be different.
Yeah, and so this is a good thing to work into your budget, whatever you decide to do, because we hadn't until recently, but it was something we discussed. Like, obviously, there's going to be times where we need to bring people in, and we don't want to every time be kind of discussing amongst ourselves what should we do. So it's good to have just something in place, especially if you're planting and you're kind of a solo, like a solo pastor, or don't have other people on your team that can preach. Is something you're going to need to do pretty often, or relatively regularly. And so it's a good idea to have kind of an idea in place of what you want to do from the beginning.
That's what we did it, because after a couple of times we were like, what should we give them, whatever, and it was just standard thing, $100. Again, if there's someone who preaches more consistently, then you got to do something else. But that's for us. If they come on a Sunday, that's what we'll do.
Exactly. Yep.
All right. Someone else said more marketing junk. When one of the major USPS locations in your target area never received its large portion of the 5,000 plus mailers you designed and purchased ahead of your fall kickoff, and went to another local zip code, it was really frustrating. The only reason I bring this up, we've never done mailers. I'm not against mailers. You can do them. But it's just a reminder that Facebook ads or Google ads or whatever, those are options too. And the nice thing about stuff like this is you can actually track. You can get some analytics, whereas the mailers you can't. And there might be reasons why you don't really care about the analytics so much. Maybe you're just trying to get the name out. I get that. But I always like to just mention that. And always, if you do stuff on Facebook or otherwise, please, please, please target your audience geographically, not just by interest. We get, and if you're listening to this, you undoubtedly see ads for churches and stuff all over the place all the time, and they're nowhere near where you live.
Yep.
So you can't just target by interest. You also need to target by geography. And so what I do when I do ads, like we've got Trunk or Treat coming up when we're recording this, I drop a pin near our church, and I do an 8 mile, is it circumference or radius? I don't know.
Radius.
Radius. Don't know my math terms. and yours might be bigger or smaller based on how packed that certain area is or whatever and what you're doing. But I don't have any thoughts on mailers. But again, the online stuff is nice because you can track it. But please track geographically, or you'll get what happened here. Of course, this wasn't their fault,
right?
But you get stuff being sent to people who are nowhere near and will never come to what you're doing,
right? I mean, it's if you're doing mailers, obviously it's expensive. It's work. It's money. Like you would always be very specific of where you want to send it because you don't want to waste the money. But for some reason, sometimes there seems to be that disconnect between that and then doing online marketing, where that we just kind of shoot out there. But obviously, no one outside of a very specific radius. And I mean, in my case, I've gotten ads for churches out of state, like far away.
Yeah.
And that's just it's purely just a waste of money because that's not what's going to translate to people coming in your doors. And so make sure to target as much as you can.
And some of that too might be there's an option when you do ads you can do like for people who like your page and their friends, which again. Maybe I'm some friends with some random person who's, but I don't live there, so you want to be careful.
Yes.
All right, scroll down a little bit. I'll start doing their names. Roy.
Okay.
Roy writes, "Hey everyone, my wife and I just planted in Costa Mesa. We're looking to do a free fall festival for the community. What are some ways that we can raise funds for that? Also, does anyone have any experience with doing free events that can provide any advice? It'd be greatly appreciated." What comes to mind? This doesn't necessarily answer this question, but whenever I see things about fundraising for events or whatever, particularly my guess is they're just planted. It's typically for like new churches and you're trying to the best way to fundraise is just to ask people for money and not necessarily doing like a bake sale or some sort of sale or some sort of car wash. And I'm not against those things, whatever. But typically the problem is, a lot of these things take a lot of time and effort to pull off and the return on investment is just like nothing.
Yes, exactly.
It's almost nothing. And so, stuff like this, I don't know. Again, there's different context stuff. We don't know what's going on here. Like if somebody asked me, hey, would you give, for my church is doing like a fall festival, would you give to that? I would not, but I would give to like a church plant in general.
Sure.
And so the better thing to do is to kind of plan out a budget and, some launch expenses. Of course, you won't know exactly for sure, but at least have a parameter and raise funds knowing here are the events that I want to do and about here's how much money we're going to spend. That would be the better approach than when you have an idea to do something, trying to figure out how to fund it, particularly if you're new or you're starting out with a church, is to raise funds for the church plant and then make decisions what you want to do with the money you've raised, not necessarily trying to raise funds for certain things because it's just harder to give to that sort of thing. And that's my thoughts.
No, exactly. And I mean, obviously we don't know exactly what they're raising funds for or what their needs are, but just as a general sense, I would start with obviously hopefully have a budget for it ahead of time so you can plan for it, but also to just ask people for the things you need. They're talking about a fall festival, so the closest thing that we do to that is trunk or treat. I don't know if that's what they're doing or not, but we are unashamedly asking people for candy, for in the past we've done businesses sponsoring it and to help fund it and things like that. And so ask, like just whatever you need, just ask people for it. Obviously, if you strictly need money to, whether it's like you're participating in a festival and you have to pay to be in it, that might be a little bit of a different story, but you can ask for money, as Dylan was saying. But if you need supplies and things, start with just asking people, because if people understand the reason that you're doing the event or the importance of it, and they have that thing or they have the ability to buy it, which most people probably do, they're much more likely to do that than to, like you said, than to go to kind of like a fundraising a thing or event or like little fundraiser kind of thing. But if you just say, hey, we need X amount of bags of candy, or we need, I don't know, tents for this thing, whatever it is, I think you're a lot more likely to get people to show up and donate those things rather than just try and help raise the money outside of there.
Yeah, when it comes to like specific things and events, people are much more likely to buy things for it than to give towards it.
Yeah.
So they're much more likely to give towards the church in general. But like for us, we're doing trunk or treat. We could say, hey, we're going to spend, I don't know how many hundreds of dollars on candy.
Yeah.
Or we could say, hey, can you guys bring in some candy?
Right. Yeah.
Or, we need to buy this thing. So like one thing, for example, I talked with church planners to do. In fact, I talked to someone a couple months ago and they just did this and it worked really, really well. was like if you have, people are given to your church to make like a church plant to start, but let's say you have to buy a lot of stuff. And so one way to like double dip without even seemingly double dipping is, for example, to do like a baby registry for your kids ministry.
Right.
So people are given to your church, but then here are the items, and then people can go to Amazon, you can link some sites, and then they can literally buy it and not just like, we need $50 for this thing, but it's like, no, this $50 is actually going to this, and I'm actually tangibly doing it.
Yep.
We found that to be very, very effective. And so if you're doing at a festival or event, maybe people can donate supplies or bring something or buy something specific for that. You might find that is more helpful than raising money for random one-off events.
Yep, exactly. People like to do tangible things, and even though it's like the exact same thing out of their pocket, it just feels like you're doing more sometimes if you can actually give the thing that that's needed.
Yeah. So now next one we'll do Anthony. He said, I've heard it said that people belong first before they believe. This is when they feel comfortable getting connected to a church community, even helping out in various ways, that one day light goes on in coming to faith, or the light goes on in owning beliefs in a particular denomination. Has anyone tried to grapple with it as it relates to the requirements of what it means to be a member of the congregation? Commonly, we have a membership class, and people sign up to help. I think they're saying people sign up to serve with the church after going through this process. This process doesn't seem to go against the principles that people. This process seems to go against the principle that people need to belong before they believe. Thoughts or ideas? Basically, the question is, if people belong before they believe, can they serve before they're members?
Okay.
I think that's pretty much what they're saying. I've been I was at pastor gathering recently, and this was a question that was brought up of like, how do we do membership? Like, if people can serve, but they don't believe yet, is that okay? And whatever. Different churches do it differently. So there's a church you got a lot of respect for here locally, where actually the pastor's gathering was at this last time, and they don't let people serve until they're members. And so you have a sense of like, you can't really engage too much. I think you can join a group, but there's not too much you would do until you're actually a member. And there's pros and cons to all this. Again, I would just say whatever your convictions are, you should follow that.
Yeah.
The pros of you have to be a member, a partner, or whatever before you can start serving is like, you're going to have less issues in terms of if people are serving in certain positions and doing things that are detrimental. Even if they're not yet followers of Jesus, other people might walk in and may not know that. They might see someone serving who they know is like doing some pretty crazy stuff and might assume because they're in that serving position that the church is therefore condoning it. So there can be pros to that. The cons are some people serving for a lot of people is a first step to really engaging the church.
True.
And so if they're serving, they're more likely to be around other people, other believers, building more relationships instead of just coming and going on a Sunday, which then, in the course of time could certainly impact their beliefs and make them follow Jesus. For us, you can serve before you're a member or a partner, but there are like some things that we don't let you do. So like,
Sure, yeah.
You're not going to serve in the band on the stage or like next steps if you're not a follower of Jesus. And typically you're going to be a partner soon or you're on the way.
Right.
In our kids ministry, you can't be like one of the lead teachers unless you're a follower of Jesus, which again, for the kids ministry, I guess you could start doing that technically before you're a partner. But you're probably on the way to be a partner, or we've at least had these conversations.
Right,
and if you're going to serve in kids and like be one of our lead teachers, then you probably are going to be a partner because that's a big commitment.
Yeah.
And so there are certain positions like greeting at the door or hospitality, coffee, or Parker, where you don't have to be a believer necessarily, or certainly don't have to be a partner yet at our church. We have found, again, I would just say do whatever you're convictionally led to do. We have found that for us, we do our Discover lunches once a quarter, which is our partnership process. And so some people, because they're once a quarter, start serving before they even come to that. And then they come to that, they're connected. And so it's worked really well for us. We've just found that if people start serving, there's a high likelihood they're going to stay.
Yeah.
But you just have to do it, wrestle with that. I don't think there is not a necessarily right or wrong answer. I would just say follow your convictions and know there's pros and cons to both approaches.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, if you have very specific convictions, then you're probably going to go with them regardless. But I would maybe challenge you just to think about some of these positions that are obviously not leadership positions, obviously not teaching or on stage type positions, but some of the more just hospitable type positions where people can get to know each other and things. I'm not even saying you need to change your stance if you're kind of in the opposite stance or in the opposite camp, but I would just say to think about why not those specific positions. Like, is it just because we have an umbrella policy of don't serve, and so that just covers everything, or because we've actually thought about each specific position? In my mind, and obviously people can disagree, and that's cool, but in my mind, if someone's a non-believer but wants to serve, they're probably, maybe not always, but probably not going to be super combative about beliefs. Like if
Right.
someone really doesn't want to be there, they're probably not going to want to serve. And so if they want to be there and want to serve, but maybe haven't made that decision or still questioning their faith, they're kind of figuring out what that means. I would rather them come early to church and spend time with some other believers and meet people and stuff like that. And so in my mind, I don't see a problem with it. Obviously, if you feel convicted otherwise, go with your convictions. But I would just challenge you to think about the position specifically rather than just think about overall church serving, but think about how different positions kind of affect people and so forth.
Yeah. So again, just there's pros and cons to both,
Yeah,
and so figure out
sure
what you want to do, and know that there are people who might disagree, and that's okay. I was going to say one other thing about that, and now my mind has slipped about serving. So,
Wish I
I
could
was going to say too. So
there it
this
is.
is part of why. I mean, it's not really one of the main reasons, but it's a ancillary reason for our Discover class. Why we're also like very honest and like try to encourage people to come. Like we say, like, hey, if you've been here longer than 6 months and you haven't been to a partnership class, like you should be there. You should
Right.
come. I mean, if you're not a follower of Jesus, still figuring out, that's different. But typically, if someone's coming for like 6 months consistently, they're at least pretty interested. Because at our partnership class, we share what our beliefs actually are. We share our secondary beliefs that faithful Christians can disagree on, but we don't want it to be a surprise because we don't want people serving and being in a group and giving for a long, long time and then being like, I can't believe no one ever told me this.
Right.
And so we let you serve early, but we also really emphasize, hey, you should come to this to make sure that this church is really, good fit for you.
Yep, exactly.
All right, next one. We'll scroll down a bit. A guy named Brad. He said, anyone started in a second-story office space with walk-up only? We are in a small town and are looking for somewhere to meet initially. Very limited commercial space available, but there's an opportunity to rent a smallish office space at an unbelievable rates downtown with ample parking and entrances on the main street and the rear of the building. Looking for anyone to chime in. I went on this route. I actually have some experience with this.
Do you?
I do. One, I don't have a ton of experience with this first example, but when we were in Guatemala a couple years ago, there was a church that was doing that. They were in I forget, Guatemala City, and so it was kind of like the main, it's pretty westernized, I guess is the right word to say. I don't know, industrial or whatever. And they were, I say that because it's not some like rural village church. It was like a church, and they were on the second floor of an office park, and they were moving at that point to like a bigger building, and it worked for them. I think the challenge is stairs. Now I say personally, so when I helped my wife and I helped plant a church in Wilmington years ago, and we met at this like event center, and we met on the third floor of it. So it was like it was inside a building, but we were met on the third floor, and so there were stairs, but it also had an elevator right in the middle. So it wasn't as the hurdle there, I think, wasn't quite as big. And then we actually had kids on the first floor because there was like meeting stuff in the middle. And so on the first floor was a couple kids' rooms. And it was fine. I mean, it wasn't terrible because the office park or the little meeting place, it wasn't, the reception, like a lobby area, wasn't big. Like they hosted weddings and stuff. So it's not like you could get lost. Like as soon as you walked in, you kind of knew where to go. If you're in an office park, office space, it might be kind of like more of a strip mall setting-ish where there's like more places to go and more spread out. I would just say have very, very, very clear signage, not just on your building up top, but I would assume like, hey, if I'm, like for us, I mean, our space is pretty simple, but our old space too. Like for me, I like to think of it as like an airport where the idea is to have, like for people to know where to go without having to talk to somebody. Now you want people to talk to people, but you also know some people like want to come in and out. They're kind of weird. They're anxious. Not weird is not the right word. They're anxious. Maybe they're intimidated. They just want to go. And so if people don't know where to go, that's the bigger problem. So I would have a couple maybe signs on the sidewalk, even on the first floor saying, hey, we're up the stairs and pointing arrows. Like don't just have, people can see our building sign like from the parking lot. Like tell them exactly where to go. I don't think it's the end of the world. Again, I think location is really, really important. And if that's where you want to be, there's ample parking. I wouldn't necessarily be against it, but if there's not an elevator nearby, that might be a hindrance to some. But just be really, really clear on where to go, and so people aren't wandering around trying to find a space.
Yeah, questions like this are always tough because obviously don't know anything about the city this guy's in, don't know anything about the location. So it's very easy as an outsider to be like, well, that's not ideal. You should look for something else. But I have no idea if anything's available in that. Like, I don't know what the market's like in that area at all. So, so just going strictly by like what he's posting, I agree. It's probably not ideal. If you only have stairs, there's certain people that are never going to be able to attend. Obviously people that are handicapped and so forth, if you don't have a way for people to get up the stairs. And so there's just challenges like that to think through. Obviously, proper and ample, and maybe over the top signage is good. Maybe putting greeters like at the wherever people would be most likely to see them, not just having the people go up the stairs first.
Yep.
And I don't know what the answer to this is, but just something to think through. I would hate, and I'm sure this guy would agree, would hate for someone who can't make it their way upstairs to show up and have to be turned around, basically, to show up and either if it's a physical thing where they'd be embarrassed to have to turn around and can't make it up the stairs, or whatever the case is. So I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know if the answer is to put it on their website or something like that, but that would obviously, it seems like a deterrent for everybody. But it's just something to think through, because obviously you would hate for someone to walk up, or to walk up or to approach and be like, oh, I just have to turn around. And obviously, greeters there that can't really help them get up if there's no other way up. So just something to think through. It's a challenge. It's not necessarily a end all be all, but just you would hate to have that happen one Sunday and be kind of sitting there like a deer in headlights thinking, I never really thought about how to approach this if someone actually shows up that needs something other than stairs.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the earlier question. There's pros and cons to both. Again, we don't know your situation. It might be great, and so it might be worth doing, but just know that this might be a limitation for some.
For sure.
So just know that going in. Again, be very clear. I would have greeters at the bottom of the stairs. Again, even if it's like, well, our building's right here. It's like, if some people are really intimidated, they've never been to church before, they don't know where to go. If it's resistance at all, they might not come.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was going to say one other thing too. I keep forgetting. Have greeters down there.
Yep.
I was going to say too, even on your website, you might say, here's our location. We meet on the second floor. Just like giving people a heads up too can be really, really helpful.
That's a good idea.
All right, the next one comes from Christy. She says, we started earlier this year as a small group that has slowly been becoming a church over the summer. We did most of the paperwork. In September, we started our first offering time with the option to give online. However, the first month, no one gave. We are still very small, maybe 15 or so each week, so maybe that's normal. What you're giving at the beginning, any tips? Yes, lots of tips. Our biggest tip is talk about money a lot and not apologize for it. This is something we talk about often on this podcast. It's not awkward. It's not weird. Just talk about it. And also, to say nobody gives, there was a lot of questions here, so I don't know. There's some comments that were helpful, so I haven't read through all of them. Yep. No one gives is a little iffy, because if nobody's giving, what about the people who are leading? True. And I think if I remember, actually I'm going to open the comments because I want to be correct on this. Somebody said that they have been giving. I am giving. That's paying for all of our paperwork, initial stuff like pens. I just set some giving for a missionary. Basically, what I accomplished, what might be happening here was with the church planner I assessed. This was happening with them. We told them this was not a good idea. Some people, maybe in the beginning, your giving is like buying stuff for the church, and and I would recommend give to the church and then use the church money to buy the stuff, because you need to start setting a budget in. Because what will happen when it's just personal, you'll keep spending and spending because you really want it to work out, and it's not good. So I wouldn't be like, well, I'm going to give. I would give $500 a month, let's just say, for example. So instead of actually giving it, I'm just going to buy stuff with it. I wouldn't go that route, because you need to start seeing how much income your church can take in and is taking in.
Yeah.
So first of all, everyone should be giving to the church, and then the church should be, with a church card, checks, whatever, the church should be buying stuff. So I wouldn't go that route. Secondly, you need to talk about this a lot. Like every single week, talking about what we're doing, why we need, finances, giving people the opportunity to give. Like even for us, it's not a big spiel every week, but we don't like passing off free plate, which a lot of churches don't do that anymore.
Right.
But at the end of service, one of the last things we always say is, here's how you can give. You can give online. So it's like in front of people, but you need to be talking about it a lot. If there's nobody is giving, then their investment might not be very strong, which isn't obviously also not a good sign. And so I would just say, don't just say, hey, giving is online, and then if you want to give, and then every time you guys meet every week, I'm assuming, so it's becoming like a church, mention as an option to give, and then also talk about it, preach about it, and don't be afraid don't apologize for it, because oftentimes churches that don't talk about it often, and then they make it like this big thing, like, sorry, people don't like talk about money, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess I don't want to hear about money. Whereas if you just talk about it like it's a normal thing, nobody really cares. So I would just talk about giving a lot. People should be giving to that, though, and not personal spending on church stuff.
Yeah, and one question I would have for this person, and obviously, like I said before, we're just going off the post, so this certainly isn't meant to be like accusing this person of anything.
Right.
But the way they phrase it, and I've heard other people phrase something similar, like we started a small group that's slowly becoming a church. I would ask if the people that are in that small group like, do they know that they've become a church? In other words, is this just like a group and the group's grown a little bit, and so now we kind of transition to now we meet on Sundays and we kind of do the same sort of thing? Or has there been like, okay, now we are church and not just group of people meeting? Because that may be clear to the leadership and like this is what we want to do, but that may not be super clear to the people if kind of the structure or what you've been doing hasn't really changed that much from when you were just a small group. And so it may be a sense of people don't really realize that they need to be giving, because nobody, if you're a small group, you don't really give to a small group. You give to maybe the parent church.
Yeah.
But if you're kind of becoming a church, I would make sure that you've communicated with people like, hey, we're actually creating a church, we're planting a church, or however you want to phrase it, and so we need funds. We need to file paperwork. We need all these things, and just make sure people are crystal clear about the path they're going and kind of where they are in that journey. And so they don't think that they're just kind of still in that small group phase, even though you as the leadership may have thought, hey, this has kind of become a church now.
Yep. We talk about fundraising too as well in our Growing Your Launch Team course, practicalplanting.com/launch. There's more stuff there. But yeah, talk about money a lot and communicate it. I think sometimes people just don't know that we're doing this thing. And so when we assume, that's when we get in a lot of trouble. So next question will be from Andrew. It says, what do you think? We are currently rent from a Messianic Jewish congregation at an incredibly low rate. We are entering year 2 and beginning to get the question of next steps building-wise. I recently received feedback from a successful church planner that we need to push to get our own space because it is weird meeting another church. I've also received advice that we should stay where we are because it is cheap and begin putting money away. So option A or B. A, get our own leased space to avoid weirdness and meeting at a Jewish church and potentially spur more immediate growth. B, stay where we are and begin putting money away and looking at land or long-term buildings. So again, got some good feedback on here. I offered option C, which I hate being that guy. Like I really hate when people ask a question and like you don't like. What? It's like that's just answer what people are wanting. Right. But I thought it was relevant. I think option C is what I said. Was you also could rent a different space. You don't have to like necessarily buy a building, which I think was what I was saying here. Like we had to put money away for like a long term. You don't have to do that. Now, the question is, where should you do? Some of these comments are good. Some of them are not so good. Like, just ask God, I think is what somebody said. Like, come on, that's not helpful. I think he knows he needs to, like, ask God. Right. Here's what I would say. A lot of this is really, so the hard thing is in ministry, I just want to say this, there's not necessarily a right answer to things. So we think, well, what should I do, as if, like, there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. And so we have, my favorite term that I heard is called, like, a mythical bishop, where, like, you feel like there's like this mythical bishop that says you have to do things certain ways, and you don't. And so obviously it's a really challenge. Trying to figure out where you meet is a really big challenge. But I always want to preface this by saying, like, there's not like, if I make the wrong decision, I'm being unfaithful.
Right.
Now, again, like all these things, there's pros and cons. The pros to meeting at another place is the rent's probably cheaper. That's typically like the biggest pro. And, the setup, you might not have as much setup tear down. You might be using their equipment. The cons are you can't make it to what you want to be. You might not be able to meet at your ideal times. Now, this says it's a Jewish congregation, so I don't know if they meet on Sunday or not. So I don't know when you meet. But yeah, the hard part about meeting is using another space is you might not meet where you want to meet and that sort of thing. I think, push my own church because it's weird meeting another church. I would just say, like, I would think through, like, what do you want to do? What are your hopes and dreams? Just because some people are like, this is weird, it doesn't necessarily mean that's wrong, because again, one or two people might say something with good intentions, but often like the people that are happy about stuff will never say anything. And you might get one or two people who don't like it, but they're more likely to vocalize it because they don't like it. And you might think like everyone's thinking this. So again, this is an opportunity to say, here's where we are right now. We're planning, looking, whatever, like be honest about you're being open, but don't just assume like because somebody thought it was weird that it therefore is weird. Right. But if you're open to moving, I would start looking around. And again, my advice would be option C, because I think it's really hard putting money away for a building when you're not really sure, especially when you're such a young church plant. I wouldn't necessarily do that because you probably have financial needs you need to do things. Yeah. So I wouldn't really go that route. I would more so look around if there's other spaces that you can lease for a couple of years. Yep. That's the option I would go if the Messianic Jewish congregation, it just isn't working out.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it's weird, and so maybe I would try and put that out of your head, and unless you yourself think it's weird. Yeah. But I wouldn't. I wouldn't worry about. I think you said like another pastor, another church planner said that it's kind of weird. I don't think it's weird. It may not be ideal, and it may not be the best solution. But I wouldn't just the fact that it's got another name on the building let that be the only deciding factor
Yep.
of why not to go with it. Now, on the flip side, I would also not let the fact that it's cheap be the only deciding factor to go with it. And now I get we're a little bit more established. We've been around for a couple years, so I get that it's easy from an outsider's perspective to say, don't let money be the only factor. If you're the one in it, you might be like, well, we can barely pay for anything, so money has to be a major factor. So I get that, but I would challenge you to try as much as possible to not let money be the only factor, because there are times where you may need to take a little bit of a step of faith and do something that may be a little bit more stretching that will be wise in the long run. So I can't really comment on if you should stay in that building or not, but I agree. I would say your best solutions are option C, then option A, and then option B. I don't know how old they are as a church, but as a young church, and if one of the main reasons to stay where you are is because it's so cheap, that tells me that finances probably aren't super abundant, because if that's one of your bigger concerns. And so you're probably not in a good space to start considering buying a space. That's going to most likely, that's either going to be saving for an extremely long time, or it's going to be taking on a lot of debt that probably isn't a good idea to take on at this age of the church, and probably don't have a lot of assets built up. And so I think the best solution is to lease somewhere, to find somewhere else to lease if you need to get out of that space. But I think we can often overlook places that would really suit churches really well. Like, we started in an office park, and it was an office park. Like, next door to us was a lawyer's office, I think it was. And, it took some work for sure. We had to get the landlord's permission to tear down some walls and do some things to make it feel a little bit more like a church. But you can get creative, and there are definitely things you can do. So don't limit yourself to we have to be in an established church building, or we have to buy a church building. There's a lot of other options if you can get a little bit creative. And that's not even talking about going the portable route. Obviously, there's the portable route. If you're a little bit established, it's kind of hard to not be portable and then go backwards to portable, but that is certainly an option. But even if you don't go the portable route, there's probably a lot more options if you're willing to lease rather than trying to move from a really cheap option all the way to purchasing something of your own.
Yeah, Andrew, you said you put in the comments, someone asked 90s in attendance, 120K annual. So I think that's a great place to find a place to rent. I would not focus on buying. I mean, it gets all contextual. It's all different. It's something fine. But I would not in year two. We got to start saving money to buy a building. I would maybe start saving money to rent. Maybe renting a place is going to be more expensive, so you want to start saving for that, but not to, because it'd take you 5-10 years to start saving money to buy something, and then you'd be stuck there for a while.
And what you just said is exactly right. The challenge is you're buying somewhere, you're there, and so to buy something when you're that young of a church, you have no idea what your needs are going to be long term. And so a lease it allows you to kind of figure out what those needs are and to save if need be. To when you're ready to buy, to actually know what you kind of need to be at long term. If you're really young, it's really hard to gauge that, and you may end up buying somewhere that's really going to limit you as you get a little bit further down the road.
And then I love what one person commented. Ben said, gave some advice, and he said, sometimes I'm cautious of advice from people who don't have to live with the consequences. Ultimately, you have the best information to make this tough call, and you have to live with the outcome of the decision. I just love that, because it's very true. Very often we can, and this group and others, be like, do this, or it's like things that aren't helpful. It's it's really easy to say. It's a lot harder to actually do it.
Yes.
So even what we're saying, take it and leave it, but those are some thoughts.
Yep.
We'll do a couple more. The next one is this from Steve. It's kind of a long post. Let me see if I can whittle this down. 9 months away from launch, just started gathering people into a church plant. This is church number 3 for us. It feels different world from having planted the last time 16 years ago. We have 2 to 3 families potentially growing. We are aiming for a large launch, which isn't typical for a church movement. We're currently using support for salary and initial costs. There are no church plant networks in the UK that offer matching funding. COVID is still a thing. They're gathering biweekly. Things with COVID continue to improve. We are looking at monthly previews in April or May and a big launch in October. I guess this is October of 2023, just after we move house and kids go back to school. My question is this: what kind of things would you be saying to those who are gathering within the in-person environments we are currently creating? Well, I mean, a lot of what I would say to do with this specific thing is in our Growing Your Launch Team course. So practicalplanting.com/launch. I mean, that's literally 12 months or less. That's the ideal time for this. We talk through putting a timeline together, fundraising, that sort of thing. I would just say this: you posted this question in January. I guess because it was common. We have this on most the newest, and I think someone commented earlier.
Yes.
Well, this is a thing for a lot of people.
Still,
this person was 9 months away from planting, trying to figure out what to do, essentially. Again, I would check our our course for a lot of the stuff. I think one of the most helpful things you can do is just be very clear on your timeline and what you're doing, and know that if you're more than 6 months out, you're not going to get a lot of people joining, which is not wrong. I mean, it's not right or wrong. You might be discouraged. It's just hard for people to trust and to really know what it means to join a church plant that's not launching for over 6 months. It feels far away. There's a little bit of, is this even going to happen?
Exactly.
So obviously you got to start prepping and doing all these things beforehand, but just know, in my experience, if you're more than 6 months out, or if you like aren't clear on when you're launching, like maybe in your mind you're only 6 to 9 months out, but you haven't like put a date, like here's the goal, then it's hard for people to commit to it. Now, I'm much more of a proponent of putting a date on the calendar. If you have to move it by a month or two, by the time you get closer, people don't care. They're in. But if it's ambiguous and they're not sure where you're going to be or when this is going to happen, you're just going to have a really hard time. And so start planning. I mean, the course has a lot more information, but start planning your calendar, all that sort of thing. But just know over 6 months, the average person is going to have a hard time really fully committing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I don't have a lot to add. I mean, it needs to be a condensed time frame. You need to be super clear with your people of what that time frame is, and so there's as little ambiguity as possible. And I will say to whoever commented on this a week ago on a post that was 37 weeks old, you are digging back in the post. So thank you for bringing this back to light. But it sounds like actually this guy's. I was skimming through the comments as you're talking. It sounds like they're getting ready for their preview service now. So it sounds like things are going okay, which is good. But I agree.
Awesome.
Keep those time frames as pretty condensed and dragging things out. It's just it makes it feel better about it, like because there's so much time to plan. It's kind of pushes out the reality a little bit. But people have a hard time committing to it. It doesn't seem real until we're a lot closer to it. So keep those timeframes condensed, but also check out the Growing Your Lawn Team course and get a lot more information on how to go about it.
All right, let's do 2 more. Unless we see one we really like, then we'll do 3 more.
Okay.
By Chris, what management systems do you use for communicating with your team members for projects and meetings? I'm not sure if this is just staff or just the whole church.
With your team / members.
Looking in the comments, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because it was a little bit different. I mean, for us, I can say how we do both. So for us, for our staff, there's 4 or 5 of us, whatever, something like that. And there's different ways. I mean, you could text, you can email. We use GroupMe. We have Marco Polo. We can send videos. My recommendation is always to pick one that says this one is like the most important that you must respond on. Because if you have multiple options of communicating, making people check all these things all the time, I think it's a little unfair and it's just hard to manage.
Yeah.
So for us, it's email. Like if you get emailed, you have to respond. Like the Marco Polo thing, we don't use it all the time. So oftentimes if I send one, I'll text someone and be like, hey, I mean, obviously it's not urgent whenever you check it.
Yep.
Or if I need someone to do something, I don't normally text them because I typically ask people to email me. Or, our GroupMe is like we're all in there together. It's a, group messaging app. And there's nothing serious. Like if there's someone needs feedback on something, they'll post it in there. People will check it when they check it.
Right.
But I would recommend when it comes to staff or a launch team or a core team or whoever that have responsibilities is to pick one mode of communication as like, this is the one that we all have to respond to. The other ones are nice because it can get really confusing if you have all these channels and Facebook messages and Instagram messages. And it's just like, where are you supposed to go?
Right.
Where's like actually important? So.
And I would, I obviously don't know like what kind of systems they're trying to do or what they're trying to communicate, but I would encourage you to, how do I phrase this? Don't make it overly complicated. In other words, if email sufficient, not saying you have to use email, but if email sufficient, consider using email. Like there's a lot of apps to do a lot of different things, but the kind of more complicated things, especially when you're smaller, and I understand like you want to get systems in place for when you grow, but if you're kind of making things more cumbersome than they need to be and bringing people on, that's just you're creating more and more barriers of entry if you're kind of making it more complicated than you actually need it to be. So if I get wanting things to be as technologically advanced as possible and using the thing with the most features and things, but if something like email is sufficient for what you need to do, that's okay. It doesn't have to be whatever, we use GroupMe. We don't use GroupMe for pretty much anything productivity wise. I guess I don't want to say like not productive. Like it's not just like sending memes all day, but like we're not having like serious conversations in there. Or we're not sending messages in there for someone if we need something from them or anything like that. So that's just more of it's basically like a group text. Like it's just an easier way to communicate on basic things. But email is efficient. We know that pretty much anyone that we bring in is going to know how to use Gmail, like is going to understand the system. And thus far, it's worked out well. And there's not really anything that we need from it that doesn't exist there. Now, if you're talking about projects and you need to like do project tracking together, obviously that's a different story. But if we're just talking like strict communication and trying to communicate with your team, it's a pretty basic and easy place to start.
Yeah, and just be very honest. And if somebody is slacking off in this communication area tool that you're using, you have to be honest of like, this is important to us because it's just not helpful. If one person's not doing it and there's no accountability, other people will stop doing it as well. Now, when it comes to communicating, this is probably team members, so it is probably, well, it says team plus members. It's probably more of a staff thing. But when it comes to the church, we've done episodes around this as well. We use all avenues. So for us, I'll do this real quickly. If it's 3 weeks or less, we'll do a next step if it's relevant to like the majority of the congregation. If it's like, only for a certain subgroup, we won't, unless it's like we want all the church to know about.
Right.
We have a bathroom graphic. We print them. We put the little, I don't know, it's a piece of paper on, what are those plastic things called?
Yeah, a little sign holder.
Yeah, sign holder.
Yep.
And we put them in all the stalls and in front of the urinal. So when you're going to the bathroom, you have to look. If you're sitting, you're looking at the stall door. If you're standing, you're looking at the wall. And it's right in front of you. And it only has at most three things, sometimes two things coming up. We have a group. When people sign up, like for the Connect card information, we also put them in our all text. We've got an all text notification, so we put people in that. We text maybe once or twice a month. I mean, it's very minimal because we don't want people unsubscribing. So if it's an important event, we'll do that. We do a weekly newsletter. So once a month with things coming up from the church. And things are really important too. It's important to preach those announcements as well. And so finding ways to put them in your sermon if you're doing a push or whatever, and it's relevant as well. So all different ways.
All different ways, yeah. I mean, and that was a quick run through. So if you want more information,
we have an episode. I don't know where.
We have an episode on
how to get people to sign up for events and stuff like that. So
join the Practical Church Planning Facebook group too. Ask there. We can type it all out for you.
In fact, now I'm thinking about. I think 2 episodes ago was how to get more signups for events. So
it was very recent. Yeah,
check that out as well. All right, last one I think is Ian says this: portable churches. Do you have people serve on setup and another team, or do you keep it totally separate? They had some different feedback. Part of this is hard because, especially if you're a newer church or a smaller church, you don't have enough people to do all those things differently.
Yeah.
I think in an ideal world, they are separate because it's a big ask. At the same time, people are already going to be there, and so I get it; they're already there. But what you might find happens is people get burnt out from doing setup, for example, and that can then also makes it so they're just not going to serve at all because they need a break, which is fine. But so if they're in multiple positions and they get burnt out in one, we've just found typically that they stop serving at all for a season. And so if you have in multiple positions, again, there might be a need for that. Just know there's a higher chance that if they're doing setup and serving in kids, well, if they get tired of doing one, they're probably going to pull back from both.
Right.
So I think in an ideal world, again, I've been part of churches that were set up tear down, although the setup ones that I've been a part of always were a little bit. I mean, we're probably all over 200 people, and so it's you have a little bit more room there.
Yeah.
So not totally against it, but just know that that's a potential stressor if they're doing multiple positions.
This is always a challenge because you'll have people that if you leave it up to the person, like in other words, we're not going to require you to do it, but if you want to, then sure. You're going to have people that will, and you're going to have some people that maybe do it and are perfectly fine doing it forever. And you have some people that say they're perfectly fine doing it until one day you find out that they're just done and they're overworked. Maybe they feel taken advantage of, even if it was their idea, or they just overestimated their capacity. And so therein lies the challenge of you don't want to force someone to serve less than they want to. If they have a higher capacity, if they have the bandwidth, you don't want to limit them because they want to serve, but also you need to help people be kind of cognizant of their own limitations. And so I don't know that there's a perfect answer. The little experience I have with portable churches, I wasn't on that team, but from what I remember seeing, there was a group that would set up, and then most Sundays, especially the ones that set up like the auditorium, the more like technical things, then most Sundays from my memory, this is a while back, but they would set up and then they would all go out to breakfast together because they had to be set up much earlier than everybody else. And I remember some of them came back and did serve in other positions. I don't remember if it was the same weeks or not, but some of them did serve there and in other positions, but not everybody. And so I certainly, and I don't think this is what he's asking, I certainly wouldn't make it a requirement because that's a lot of work. But if someone is willing to, you could consider maybe like giving them a kind of like a trial run's not the right way to put it, but kind of like a window of time if they want to serve in multiple positions. Say like, hey, maybe we'll try this for 3 months, and then let's talk and see if this is too much for you, or something along those lines, or maybe look for a kind of a more low-key position as the second position for them to serve in if they really want to serve somewhere else. But you don't want to force someone not to serve when they want to serve. But also, we've experienced many times of people who just want to do everything and with good intentions too, but just end up burning themselves out, and it's
worse.
And
Because then you lose them.
and you lose them, and it gets really tough.
Even though you're like, well, you said you would do this. So for us, it's like
Yeah.
we don't let you serve more than twice a month.
Right.
There might be some exceptions to that, but
Yep.
generally like, no. And people are like, okay, that's fine. For this, again, it's hard. I think one way you could get people to do both is if you limit how many times they can serve a month to, like, if they're going to do multiple positions, like if you could limit it to once a month, that would be great. Again, the hard thing with setup and tear down is like you get in a rhythm. And so if they only do setup once a month, for example, it's hard to get everyone trained.
Yeah.
And some people like to do setup and tear down. It's very tangible. If they're, if they don't want to greet or whatever, or they're just really good with their hands and building stuff, putting stuff together, they really like it. But if you want to do multiple, that's an option as well, is be very clear on you can only serve once or maybe twice a month, because I know that the need is the difficult thing.
Yeah.
But don't just let it be. You can serve every single week with no real, I just think people will quit soon, sooner than you might think.
I think you're right.
We'll end with one last one. I lied because I scrolled through as Brian was talking.
Okay.
Bruce, and I'll tell you why I want to answer this in a second, but he says our total attendance is in the 60s. We have 6 volunteers in our children's ministry, which is currently 1st to 6th grade. 2 of the 6 serve twice a month. Recently, we had a 1-year-old, a couple, whatever. Several members are elderly with significant health issues, prohibited from serving. So blah, blah, blah. So he says this, so we need something for kindergarten and younger, but we don't have any potential volunteers. Someone told me that a monitored video camera can substitute for a second adult in children's ministry. Has anyone done this? So people had comments. Again, the recommendation was don't. The video monitor cannot substitute for people.
Right.
The reason I want to answer this question is because, not to say like don't use video camera, but to say there are going to be a lot of times when you're planting smaller, even if you're not necessarily smaller, but people move, like there's holes where you can't do everything the way you want to do it. And I want to say that it is okay if you don't have enough people serving in kids ministry to do a full kids ministry thing. I get it's discouraging, but if that means you can't have kids ministry for a time or for that certain age group, I get it's frustrated. Then that you just need to know that that's okay. Like you can't do something you can't do. I know a lot of the discouragement with church planters or newer churches or smaller churches is you see these large churches who are doing all these things, international, local missions, got programs for all the ages, and it's like you get stressed out because you can't do all those things. There's a lot less stress if you just realize we're going to do what we can do, and that's it. So like even for us, real time, we're talking about wanting to break up our kids' classrooms into more than we currently have, and we're not sure we're going to have enough serve people to do it.
Yep.
So I was telling our kids people like, if the oldest kids have to come into service for us to have an additional kids classroom because we don't have enough people to serving, we will do that.
Yeah.
Now that's almost happened in the past. It's never happened in the past because part of it, like when people see a need, they're much more likely to fill it.
Right.
It's hard to say we need people to serve. It's easier to say, here's why we have more kids. We don't whatever. We need this, or this is, not in a guilt way. And I wouldn't necessarily do this. I wouldn't do this from stage on a Sunday, but like, hey, the older kids are going to be in service if we don't have enough people that can serve in kids right now. But yeah, just like I would say, if you can't do something, then just be honest with your people. And I know it's frustrating, but you can only do what you can do. And that's what my encouragement to you is you can't do everything you want to do. And there will be seasons where that can't happen. And I know it's discouraging, but don't feel like you have to force something if you just can't make it happen.
Yep. And here's the kind of like tightrope to walk is I think we can be hesitant to do anything if it's not perfect, which we would both say probably shouldn't be the goal. Like nothing's going to be perfect. And so you can do things even if they're not perfect, but also you shouldn't do things if it's not something that you can do in the way that is appropriate to do it.
Yeah.
So obviously this guy's question was answered, but just in this scenario, it's as a parent, I would much rather have a church say like, hey, we actually don't have the ability to have children's ministry. Now, obviously that would probably mean we can't come. Like we have 2 little kids. I'm not gonna bring my baby into service probably. And like that would probably mean that we're not gonna come, or at least we're not all gonna come at the same time. But I would rather know that and still have a decent outlook of the church and maybe still be able to tell someone else about it who doesn't have kids or doesn't have kids in that age range, than show up into a situation that seems unsafe or inappropriate or whatever because they feel like just kids ministry is something we have to do. Now, obviously, I don't think this guy's going to do something inappropriate or whatever, but like I would rather us be honest about our limitations and say, hey, we can't serve every single thing. We want to, sure, of course, but we just don't have that capacity right now. We're working on it, but we're not at that place at this point. Than to say, hey, we have something for everybody, and then you show up to it, and it's just something that is clear they don't have the capacity to do, whether it's a safety thing or whether it's just poorly done or kind of halfway put together. You can only do the things you can do, and people understand that. This guy said his church is in the 60s attendance wise. I don't think anyone's showing up saying like you should have every single thing for me because it's a small church. And I mean, we're a little bit bigger, not a ton bigger. I don't think anyone's showing up here saying we have to have everything for me, because that's just not the reality of a smaller church. And so just be honest about what you can do, be honest about your capacity as a church and as a leader, and there's things you have to put off for a season. It's unfortunate. We all want to have kids ministry, obviously. Like, we all agree it's important and it's an important thing. But if you physically can't, you physically can't. And you can't just manifest people. And the more kind of details he put in his post would kind of maybe make him hesitate a little bit from like making a public thing of, hey, we need you guys to serve in kids, from some of the details he gives. And so you can only do what you can do, and you can work towards it, but don't beat yourself up or guilt yourself if you don't have the capacity to do it, because it's better to not do it than to do it in a way that's going to turn people away.
Yep. All right. So that was answering some of your ministry questions. Hopefully it was helpful for you. Again, you can ask everybody their feedback in the Practical Church Planting Facebook group. And of course, if you've got a lot of stuff that's weighing you down, whether it's administrative, bookkeeping, videos, websites, payroll, all these sort of things, missionsupport.com. Check them out, and they can come alongside you so that you can enjoy ministry again. You can also check out practicalplanting.com/launch for our Growing Your Launch Team course. And that's all we got. We'll be with you next week on Practical Church Planting.